Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 36, Euthyphro 4c. Socrates was surprised to find that Euthyphro was prosecuting his father of all things. This is quite unlike normal Athenian practice. It's usually the case that a family member of the victim prosecutes the murderer. Euthyphro now explains why it's actually a family member of the murderer, not the murder victim, who should prosecute the murderer. As Euthyphro has already said, if the person who killed justly, then we should let him go. But if the person who killed unjustly, that's when you should prosecute them, because killing someone unjustly leads to pollution, and then both the killer and the prosecutor have miasma and need to be purified. And purification occurs during the prosecution process in a court of law. In other words, for Euthyphro, there is some connection between dike and religious purification. Here's what Euthyphro says. Ison garto miasma gignitai, ansonesto toiuto sonedos, kai mea fosiois sautonte kai ekenon te dike epexion. For an equal miasma, pollution, comes about if you associate with some such person knowingly, being aware of it consciously, and you don't purify both yourself and that person by prosecuting him by means of a dike. There's a lot to talk about here, and I think we should start with the concept of pollution, miasma. Miasma is a noun derived from the verb miaino, which means to stain or dye, but it gradually came to mean also defile. And it seems that miasma began life with this later sense as a stain or that which pollutes. The first use of the word that we know about is in 458 BC in a tragedy by Aeschylus, but it seems to me that the concept of pollution has been around for a very long time. For example, in the very first part of the Iliad, we see Apollo punishing the Greeks with a plague. And this is all because Agamemnon had offended the priest of Apollo. So because of one man, everybody had to suffer, and the only solution was for Agamemnon to make things right with the priest of Apollo by returning the priest's daughter to him with due compensation. Another plague is caused by Oedipus, who unwittingly killed his father and married his mother. It can happen to anybody. The solution in this case was for Oedipus to go into exile. For good measure, he blinded himself. That first explicit reference to miasma in 458 refers to the pollution of the temple of Apollo, where someone has taken refuge. This someone is Orestes, who has killed his mother, Clytemnestra. In fact, we should stay with this tragedy because it makes an explicit connection between the law court and pollution, religious pollution. It's beyond the scope of this podcast to talk about the history of Athenian tragedy, but we should say that tragedies were presented in trilogies. 3 tragedies were presented during the course of one day, and yet only one complete trilogy has come down to us. As luck would have it, that is exactly the trilogy which concerns us. And this is the Oresteia by Aeschylus, which won the prize in 458 BC. This masterpiece deserves its own podcast, but I cannot do it here. All I'll say here is that we learn from the three tragedies which hang together, one after the other, chronologically. We learn that Agamemnon killed his daughter, Iphigenia, and because of that, that was one of the reasons why his wife, Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, decided to kill him. And then the son of Agamemnon had to kill his mother, Clytemnestra, because somebody had to do it, and Apollo encouraged him to do it. Once Orestes had killed her, he escaped to Delphi to seek sanctuary with Apollo, but Apollo, being the idiot that he is, had forgotten that Orestes himself would be persecuted because he had killed his mother. But who would avenge the murder of Clytemnestra? Orestes has run out of family members who would be able to murder him. There is his sister Electra, but she's a woman and is hardly likely to be able to kill him. Incidentally, Clytemnestra was able to kill her husband by using guile, and Electra seems too nice to be able to do that sort of thing, and she likes Orestes. This is where the Erinnues come in, or a nicer name for them is the Eumenides, or in Latin, Furiae, or in English, the Furies. These are ancient goddesses who go around persecuting people who deserve to be persecuted, and Orestes is one of those people. He sought sanctuary from them in Delphi, and it is the Furies who remark that he has polluted the sanctuary of Apollo. And if nothing was done about this impasse, Orestes in the sanctuary, the Furies besieging the sanctuary, the miasma would no doubt have spread. Luckily, Athena comes to the rescue, and this is what the final tragedy of the trilogy is all about. The name of the tragedy is Eumenides. So we see that the Furies are actually important to what happens in the tragedy, and they really are. We see that they are important. Long story short, Athena sets up the first murder court in Athens, and the Furies are subsumed into the system in such a way that whatever the final outcome is, the pollution associated with that trial will be done away with. There will be purification. In other words, the trial itself becomes a sort of purification ritual. This was a very popular trilogy, and it must have made the Athenians very proud. But for our purposes, the main point is that this makes explicit the notion that the court dealing with offences against the gods, the court which is presided over by the Archon Basilius, actually removes any miasma caused by the offence under discussion. What Euthyphro says here now makes much more sense, and we also see that he is not actually being insane at this moment. The Athenians always think that he's mad when he predicts things in the assembly, but this idea that you prosecute in this court in order to remove the miasma is probably generally accepted. Even Euthyphro's claim that it's a family member who should prosecute a murderer and not a family member of the victim who should prosecute makes sense. If your family member is polluted, you will be polluted. This is what Euthyphro meant by an equal miasma. And no doubt if this was left alone, more people would become polluted until it became a problem of the whole polis, as was the case with Oedipus. We should appreciate that the relatively new, it's been around for over 60 years by now, Athenian system by which purification occurs in the trial itself is a great advance in civilization because it puts an end to chains of vengeance killings. You should no longer need to kill someone, you can just put them on trial, and that will stop the pollution. On the other hand, I think we can see that there is now going to be more concern for pollution rather than justice. It doesn't really matter whether someone is found just or not in a trial. The main point is that there is purification. And we can return to the case of Socrates to see that, therefore, what matters is that whatever pollution there is deemed to be needs to be removed by a trial. And justice itself is hardly at issue. It's just the trial itself which purifies. I've been talking a lot about purification, but the verb Euthyphro actually uses is aphosio. This is a compound verb made of apo and hosio. Apo means away, and hosio has something to do with holiness or what is sacred, and is actually the term under discussion in this dialogue. Plato is going to sort out for us the connection between hosion and dike by means of dramatization, not by a philosophical discussion. Given this, there's not much point trying to define to hosion at the moment, but we can say it's the holy or the sacred, but we'll find out more accurately what hosion is by the end of the dialogue. What matters here is to see how Euthyphro uses this verb. The idea is to remove the hosion from the miasma. At least that's what the verb would seem to mean literally. The problem is that hosion, if it's holy, there's also the negative of that, the unholy, which is anosion. And we might be tempted to think that what we remove in the court case is the unholy. The anosios is actually the person offending against the gods, and anosia are things offending against the gods. But miasma is sent from the gods, so it is not anosion but hosion, and it is this hosion which needs to be removed in this special court of law presided over by the Archon Basilios.